We are back here on Sportsline. Our guest tonight, Shan Foster, the Vanderbilt basketball great, but for this purpose of the conversation, is also deeply involved in the YWCA program and facility here in Nashville, and also really, Shane, the creator and the guy driving behind the Amend program around here. For people who don't know Amend, never heard of it before, what is it?
Amend Together is a program that's engaging men and boys to change and challenge the culture that supports violence. And we're doing that in a number of ways, not the least of which is our clubs in schools. We're in 20 schools here in Nashville with impacting 600 boys, really talking about not only how to make sure that women and girls are safe, but also valued and respected. We talk about everything from healthy manhood and masculinity to healthy communication in relationships, and how to recognize signs of abuse, how to recognize your responsibility as a bystander. You know, what is our role as men and boys, particularly in a Me Too movement? What is our role? What is our responsibility? What should we be mindful of in terms of our actions and behaviors? And then most importantly, you know, how can we make sure that we're giving back to society in a way that's meaningful? How can we be absorbed in something more greater than ourselves, right? And then so we also provide sexual harassment and violence prevention training and presentations all over the country. We work with the likes of, you know, our professional sports teams here in Nashville, as well as large corporations, nonprofits, you name it. And I've been pleasantly surprised at the number of individuals who own companies or in powerful positions who say, this is an important topic for my staff to talk about and be able to have discussion. And that's one of the things we're proud to be able to provide, is a safe space for us to have some dialogue about not only men's responsibility, but what is our responsibility as a company, as an organization, and in terms of making sure that women and girls are not only safe, but also valued and respected. And then we also have a faith-based curriculum that we're excited about, because that gives people in the faith community an opportunity to have this dialogue, to have this conversation, where we're not having the conversation enough. You know, when we think about what's happening in our country, 1 in 4 women are experiencing domestic violence, that 1 in 5 women are experiencing sexual assault, and 1 in 6 women are raped. You know, at the end of the day, this is a man's issue, you know, not because it's solely men who are inflicting violence on women, but because men have an incredible opportunity to be a part of the solution, and it's our responsibility to do so. We believe that the majority of men are good men, you know, and so if we believe that, then we need the good men of Nashville to step up and to be a part of a movement such as Amend Together, so that we can make Nashville the safest city in the world for women and girls, which is our ultimate goal.
You threw out some of the statistics there. It is so true that just about all of us have a story of someone we knew, someone we're related to, that have unfortunately been afflicted by some type of violence or assault in that regard. What's the personal connection for you that was the impetus to get this program started?
Well, I think the reality is that this is a topic that is the most unreported crime in the world. And so many times, particularly as men, we walk around with the confidence that the women and girls in our lives are safe, that they're not having to deal with these issues, and the reality is that they are. And I challenge men on a regular basis to go home and ask. You know, if you've not had that conversation, go home and ask. Be respectful and ask, and you'll find out that there are things that are happening on a regular basis, particularly as it relates to our culture. You know, I had the privilege of speaking at an event not too long ago where we were talking about the fact that women are having to think differently about how they dress and what they wear and what their bodies look like, all because of the society, the male-dominated society that we live in, and how we are imposing on women's right to make those decisions for themselves and to be their authentic selves. And so I think, you know, for me, the most important thing was that I have 6 siblings. I have 2 brothers, and I have 4 sisters. And I don't want my sisters to be victims of this kind of violence, and I don't want my brothers being the perpetrators of this kind of violence. And if I'm able to have children in the future, I want my children to grow up in a world where women and girls are not only safe, but also valued and respected, where women are not making less money for doing the same jobs, where women don't have to consider what a man might think with actions and behaviors that they do, where the response from adults is not, well, boys are just going to be boys. That's just what they do. That we're able to hold each other accountable through love and through care and through relationship in a way that allows us as a community to be better. To make sure that, like I said before, our boys are not perpetrators of this kind of violence, and so that the girls are not victims of this kind of violence either.
So first and foremost, it's about establishing a dialogue, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Just getting everybody out there willing to ask the question or willing to have the conversation about what the next step is, or protecting your sister or protecting your mother, or whoever the case may be.
Absolutely. One of the conversations that I have with some friends at dinner is I ask them to tell me about your marriage, tell me about your relationship. And of course, early on, people say, well, we've been married for 25 years, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear how you overcame. I want to hear how you got through conflicts. How did you overcome some tough things? Because that is how we grow. That is how we learn how to progress in relationships, right? And too often, particularly as men, we don't have these conversations. It's too uncomfortable to talk about healthy manhood and masculinity. It's too uncomfortable.
What is the challenge there? Because it is uncomfortable. It's not easy to go up to someone and ask them these types of questions. What is the challenge of getting these men, or young boys in a lot of cases that you're dealing with or trying to teach, to get them over that hump?
Well, I think the biggest thing is really providing a safe space and giving men and boys the permission to be authentic. The reality is, as men, we don't want to have to figure it out on our own. But we live in a world that has taught us that if we're going to obtain this thing called manhood, that you have to have a sense of control over everything at all times. And if you don't have control, then you're out of control, right? And you got to get that control back at all costs. We live in a world where men are taught that they have to figure it out, that they can't ask questions, that they can't ask for help, that they got to be tough, they got to be strong all the time. These are messages that men and boys are being taught on a regular basis. And in order to undo that, in order to get men to a place where they can grow and be better and have positive relationships and positive outcomes with their friendships, you have to give them the space and permission to be vulnerable, to really be their authentic selves. One of the things that I used to talk about was a documentary called The Mask You Live In, right? And that was my childhood. I grew up where I was one person in one setting, I was another person in another setting, and then you find yourself in a space where you don't even know who you are. Mm-hmm. You're just acting and behaving in a way based on what you've seen, what you've experienced, what happened to you, right? And so what we know is that hurt people hurt other people. Right, because they saw that experience either in their households or in their communities, and in many ways we looked up to people as young kids who use violence to solve problems. I think about Popeye the Sailor Man. I think about Power Rangers. I love watching Ninja Turtles.
Sure.
But the way Leonardo handled problems was through violence, right? And so that's what comes out. And if we don't allow men to have these kind of conversations and dialogues where we can get to the root causes of some of this, then we don't affect change as it relates to the problem.
So the Men Together program started when?
It started about 5 years ago.
5 years, and based initially, and certainly still today, right here in Nashville. Mm-hmm. What has the impact been that you have seen so far?
Well, I think the biggest impact is that we are able to have conversations and a dialogue with young men and boys on a regular basis about healthy masculinity, healthy manhood. We're talking about how to be good men who value and respect women and girls, a conversation that many of our young people specifically have not had, whether it be in the households because it's too uncomfortable, in schools, it's not the topic of the day because we're talking more about academics and how to get you prepared for college and how to get you to pass the ACT and all of those kind of things. And in most places of worship, we're not having the conversation either. It's all about abstinence. You better not be in a relationship until you're married, blah, 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 all these kind of things. So we've had the opportunity to talk to these young men in such a way that that we feel is impacting their actions and behaviors. And the result of that is hearing teachers who come back and say that the kids are different in their classrooms. They're acting different, their behavior is different, they're coming to school more, they're respectful to the women and girls in their lives, whether it be another teacher or their classmates, having boys start to think and ask questions, about boundaries, and having role models be in those kids' lives. And then on a corporate level, being able to have conversations with staff and with leadership about how we're making sure that these environments are places where women are not just safe, but also valued and respected, looking at policies, looking at blind spots. Where are our blind spots where we're not as on top of some of these issues? Do women feel comfortable coming forward in the event that something has happened? Having that kind of a dialogue, and then making sure that every company in Nashville is providing the resources. The YWCA is a huge resource for anybody who's a victim of domestic violence, the Sexual Assault Center, anyone who's a victim of sexual assault. We have resources in this community, and we need to make sure those resources are accessible for staff and for leadership even. So a large part of our success is being able to change those attitudes and behaviors as it relates to that. I believe we've had a significant impact on the conversation about violence against women here in Nashville, particularly as we have joined forces with so many of our ambassadors who are leaders in the city of Nashville, who have really taken on this and made it a part of their platform and having these conversations. But I think the best thing that we've done is change some conversations around the dinner table. When I hear leaders and CEOs and business owners talking to me about conversations they're having with their young boys at home about what is acceptable and what's not, having conversations with their daughters, having conversations with their wives about these issues, and being more sensitive about what those experiences are and how little things that we've done or thought about or said have impacted this culture. When you're changing conversations like that, I think you're pretty successful.
Shane, I think that's a great point. How much does this come back on the family, in that you can go into schools and you can have a program all you want, but at the end of the day, the number one role model, oftentimes for all of us growing up, is mom or dad or whoever the guardian is at home. How important is it for that family structure to be there and to be willing to have those own conversations around the dinner table and not make the school or the amend program or whatever have to do the conversation for them?
Well, I think it's critical. You made a great point in terms of talking about who these kids look up to. If the person you look up to is your father, and it's hard for you to have candid conversations about relationships, about respect, about boundaries, about consent. If it's hard to have those conversations at home, then that's a huge part of the education that's not happening, right? It's a huge part of the discussion that then makes it uncomfortable for the child. If I can't have the conversation at home, why would I be comfortable having the conversation somewhere else, right? And then when we think about the lack of conversation, we're leaving our kids to figure out life on their own, right? We put a cell phone in our kids' hands, and that cell phone has access to social media, has access to pornography at the same time.
Sure.
But our inability to have these kind of conversations leave our kids to figure this thing out on their own, and they're failing. And they're failing because we've cut off communication. What would happen if we're able to sit at the dinner table and have a real conversation about how to value yourself and others, how to set boundaries for yourself and others, how to respect those boundaries, how to understand that consent is critical in relationship, that you shouldn't be doing anything that you don't have permission to do, right? Having conversations about pornography and it presenting a fantasy that's not real, and that every woman in the world don't want to be treated like what you're watching on TV, right? Like, having those conversations shapes the experiences not only of women and girls, but of these boys, because the lack of doing so is causing our kids to figure it out on their own. And there's no coincidence that we're seeing inappropriate touching. We're seeing fifth grade boys who are raping fifth grade girls. We're seeing kids in our middle schools and high schools that are requesting nude photos of boys and girls. We're seeing other boys being raped by other boys. This is happening right here in Nashville, right? We can no longer sit back and say, well, that's the school's responsibility, or even it's too uncomfortable. I think it's much more uncomfortable to be sitting in court with a son who's on trial than it is to have a conversation at the dinner table. It's more uncomfortable to be sitting there with a daughter in tears because of what happened to her than it is to have the conversation. So as much as I can, I'm trying to encourage all of us to have the conversation.
Talk and have prevention before something happens makes a ton of sense. You have these programs that are in schools, you work with corporations and organizations about reviewing their policies and how they handle various things. You mentioned something earlier, though, about having the spiritual or religious curriculum to go along with some of this program. Where did that come about, and how important is that to this message as well for at least a big chunk of your audience?
Well, we've had tremendous leadership from our ambassadors, Gil Hankey from the United Methodist Men's Ministry, Rashad Fakrudin with the Nashville Islamic Center, and so many others. We're hosting a camp at Mount Zion Baptist Church, March the 12th through the 15th for spring break. It'll be a spring break camp. The faith community is in a lot of ways ground zero for a lot of people, where anytime they're hurting or something tragic happens in their lives, in their families, they go to the church in order to do so. They go to the synagogue, they go to the place of worship. Laurie Woods, Laurie Rice, who is at Congregation Micah. It's so critical that we have this conversation in those places, because that's the place where a lot of people go to for help, right? And so us not having the conversation really affects them in a very negative way. And we've heard the testimonies from women who say that they after being abused or experiencing domestic violence, and they went to their place of worship and they told them, well, you just got to figure it out and y'all need to be together. Didn't provide any resources, didn't get them help, didn't get them connected to the YWCA that has a domestic violence shelter, didn't help them to get a plan, right? And it's not because they're bad intention. It's because they don't have the resources. They haven't gone through the training. They don't know what their options are. You know, most people that I talk to when we're discussing these issues, they always say, well, if the woman doesn't like that kind of behavior, then why don't they just leave? Well, maybe you don't know that in our country right now, every single day, a woman is killed by an intimate partner, somebody who says that they love them. And the majority of the time, those murders happen when the woman decides to leave. So leaving without a safety plan, leaving without talking to people like the YWCA, puts that woman in more danger. And we don't even realize. It's just like a natural response from a place of just not knowing, right? So as much as possible, we're trying to raise awareness. We're trying to give people the information, and we're not afraid to do so, whether it's in schools, it's in college, universities, it's in major corporations, or it's in places of worship, because this is a message that is important for everybody. It's an issue that's affecting everybody, and we have to do something about it. It
is a scary problem. It is a very important message, and the good news is it appears that there are a lot of people who are starting to listen to the problem. There's a huge event coming up along with this. If all this sounds good, sounds like something you're interested in, sounds like you think it's a good cause that you would like to support, we'll come back after the break. Shane will talk about the big event that they are doing with the Nashville Predators coming up this weekend. The Preds a great organizational partner with the Amend Together program here in Nashville as well. We'll get to that on the other side. This is Sports Line on News Channel 5+.